It was a Wednesday evening when I first sensed that my world, my safe and sane world, wasn't quite what I thought it was. I had gotten home from work a bit early. I heard my wife, Marge, moving around in her bedroom upstairs and thought I would go up and say hello. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear her talking to someone on the phone. As I got closer, I could hear her end of the conversation, "Yes, sweetie, today was great. I really enjoyed it." I paused, wondering when she enjoyed work. Our bedroom door was slightly open, so I peeked through. She was undressing while talking on her cell phone. She slid out of her skirt and laid it on the bed. I noticed she was wearing lacy black panties that I had never seen before. I was about to walk in, but then she said, "I've gotta go. He could be home soon. I need to shower first. Talk to you tomorrow, stud." She put the phone on the charger and took off her blouse, revealing a matching black lace bra. Facing away from me, she removed the panties and tossed them in the hamper. The bra followed as she moved around the bed to head to the shower. She passed a mirror, and as any woman might, she stopped to look at her reflection. From my position at the corner of the door, I could see her reflection clearly. What I saw made a sick chill run down my spine. Her left breast had a distinct mark on it. My wife had a mark on her breast, and I hadn't given it to her. I felt like I might throw up, cry, or do both. I heard her gasp and realized she had noticed the mark too. She pulled up her breast with one hand while rubbing the mark with her other hand and muttered, "Ah, now I've got a mark to hide." She went into the bathroom and started her shower while I stood outside our bedroom, shaking and crying. My name is David Einsohn. Marge has been my wife for 23 years. We have 2 children, Julia, who is 19, and Tom, who is 18. Marge works part-time in procurement at the local Air National Guard base. I am a chemical engineer. Until a few minutes ago, I thought we had a great marriage and life. Now it seemed my wife needed someone else to make her life fulfilling. After a while, I regained some control. Entering our bedroom, I picked up her cell phone to find the number of that last call. To my surprise, she had a password on her phone. We had never used passwords before and sometimes made calls on each other's phones. I realized I hadn't used her phone in a couple of months. I picked up her blouse and smelled it. There was a faint trace of an unfamiliar aftershave. Going to the hamper, I picked out her panties and bra. The panties were used, as expected, but I didn't find any large traces of bodily fluid. Thinking it over, I got the digital video recorder from the kitchen and a Ziploc bag. Returning to the bedroom, I put the underwear in the Ziploc bag and tucked it in my pocket. I made a note to order a fluid detection kit and have it shipped to the office. I set up the video recorder on my dresser, facing the mirror. I wrapped one of my ties around it to keep it hidden. Then I went back downstairs. I saw that her laptop was on and tried to check her email, but she had put a password on it as well. This was another piece of evidence. I left the house, wanting to confront her but feeling like an emotional wreck with no real evidence. I needed solid proof and wanted to know who she was involved with so I could seek my revenge. I called Marge's cell phone, knowing she was still in the shower, and told her that I was stuck on a job and would grab a late dinner when I finished. Hiding her underwear in the garage, I headed to the closest bar to think and suffer. It was a quiet, run-down place that bordered on a shabby motel. It offered nothing special, average food, cheap drinks, and privacy. As I entered, I noticed a new bartender, and I hoped she knew how to make a gin and tonic. Her name was Mary. She had just started, and I enjoyed talking with her. She was a divorced mom trying to make ends meet. I got home around 11 p.m. The house was quiet with everyone in bed. I went up to the bedroom to undress. As I was slipping into my robe, Marge said, "You're late tonight, hon." Turning to her, I replied, "I'm sorry to wake you. It was a long day, but I'll make it up to you if you feel neglected." She sighed and said, "Oh, I'm just too tired right now." How about we plan something for the next day or two? It's a date, babe. I'm going to relax for a few minutes and then join you. Good night. I answered, night, grabbed the recorder, and left the bedroom. I went downstairs to my computer. As I plugged the camera into my laptop, I realized that our intimacy in the last few months had dwindled from 2 or 3 times a week to just once a week, and that for the past month, it had been only on Saturday nights. I fast-forwarded the recording until the bathroom door opened. Marge immediately went to the mirror and examined her breast. I could see the mark clearly. She got out some flannel pajamas for later, although she normally sleeps nude. I saved the video and cleared the camera, then put it away. I went to bed, adjusting the thermostat up about 4 degrees. Let's see how she likes the flannels. Marge was either sleeping or pretending to be asleep when I got into bed. Thursday morning, I got up early to avoid her. I didn't think I could hide my anger, and I needed time to get control and make more plans. I called the office to let them know I wouldn't be in until the afternoon. Then I called my friend George. I knew George would be able to help. Not only had we been good friends for years, but he had caught his wife cheating on him a couple of years ago and went through a nasty divorce. We had spent many hours together, sharing his sorrows. George is now a major in the Air National Guard. Since his divorce, he had thrown himself into his work and received several promotions, the latest putting him in charge of base security. When he answered, he said, "Hey bud, how's it going?" "Not too well right now," I replied. "I need your help. I think Marge is cheating on me." "David, I am so sorry," he said. "I'll do anything I can to help. Can you come over this morning?" "Yeah," I replied. "How about if I come over now?" "Sounds good," George said quietly. "I hope you're wrong, but I've never known you to overreact." "I don't think I am, but with your help, should be able to prove it one way or the other." Once there, we sat on the sofa and went over what I knew. When I left an hour later, I had part of a plan and had borrowed 5 digital audio recorders from George, the same ones he used to catch his wife. I drove back home. Marge's car was gone. I placed 4 recorders in the house, saving the last one for her car. I noticed the house was cooler than usual. Checking the thermostat, I saw that she had turned it down. I assumed she had a hot night. Deciding to look around a bit, I went through her closet carefully. I noticed a couple of outfits that I hadn't seen her wear before. They were more daring than her usual attire. Maybe she bought them but didn't feel comfortable wearing them in public, I thought. In the back of a dresser drawer, I found some lingerie I had never seen before. They showed signs of wear, with a couple of them torn, as if someone had ripped them off of Marge. That hurt deeply, and I stared at them for many minutes. Finally, I headed off to work. Around 3 p.m., I called Marge's cell and left a voicemail saying I was stuck on a job and wouldn't be home until late. As soon as I got home that evening, I put the final voice recorder in Marge's car and went to bed, making sure to go to bed well after Marge did. On Friday night, she was either asleep or pretending to be. I checked the audio recorders but heard nothing of interest. I quietly got the kids their breakfast, as is our custom on weekends. On Saturday, Marge gets to sleep late, and on Sunday, I do. After they finished, I went to watch TV, cleaned up the kitchen, and put Marge's breakfast in the microwave. I connected a LAN cable to my laptop, logged into the computer, and disabled wireless access. Then I left Marge a note directing her to the microwave and telling her that I was outside. I went out to start yard chores. About 2 hours later, Marge came outside, complaining that her laptop couldn't connect to the internet. We walked in, and I tried my laptop, saying, mine's connected. Let's check yours. She seemed a bit nervous and hovered around her laptop and me. I pretended to troubleshoot, and she eventually got bored and wandered away, but about every 5 minutes, she came back. While she was gone, I slipped in a memory stick and installed a keylogger program. I configured it to capture all key presses, take snapshots of the screen twice a minute, track all websites she visited, and capture her email, including deleted and sent items. The next time she left, I walked back to my laptop and restarted the wireless service. I checked that her laptop was now connecting and went to find her. After showing her that it was working, I told her that the hard drive was badly fragmented. I brought up the cleanup program and suggested that when she was done for the day, she should click a button to let the program run overnight. That would also give my keylogger time to transfer all the data to me. She slipped her hands around my neck, kissed me, and smiling seductively said, "Thanks, big guy. How can I repay you for your help?" I smiled back, lightly tapped her on the shoulder, and said, "How about washing my car?" Her face showed that she was expecting a very different answer. I kissed her cheek and added, "Just kidding. I've got to get back to work out there." She looked a bit confused as I walked out of the room. While mowing the grass, I realized that I was being foolish. I wasn't going to have a close encounter with her tonight, but I didn't want her to start thinking that I was suspicious before I had solid evidence. I needed to act normally for now. I decided to put in some effort on the yard work to be too tired for anything later. That evening, we watched a couple of movies with the kids. Marge snuggled up next to me, and it felt good. During the movies, while the kids were engrossed in the screen, Marge seemed to be in a risky mood. Toward the end of the second movie, I took a break to get a drink and took one of Marge's Xanax, figuring I'd be asleep in about 45 minutes. About 15 minutes later, Marge woke me up. I announced that I had worked too hard that day and was going to bed. Marge looked disappointed, especially when the kids asked her to stay for a third movie. I wasn't sure when she came to bed, as I was already asleep. Sunday morning was my sleep-in morning, but I was up at 5 a.m. I didn't want to be in bed when Marge woke up in case she wanted a morning rendezvous and it was time to start checking her data. I turned off her alarm clock as I was leaving. As I booted up my computer, I realized that if I didn't have evidence tonight, she would definitely be suspicious. I started up the keylogger reader and added a password to my computer. There were about 500 emails in a hidden folder, so I started reading them. The keylogger sends the oldest emails first, so I was looking at 6-month-old messages. I saw 2 emails from someone named Will, who had his own domain name, but the messages seemed to be about work. Maybe he worked with her, or maybe he was the guy. I sorted by name and found one from about 4 months ago with the subject, "Hey, hot stuff." It wasn't explicit but sounded like he was trying to seduce her. He had registered his name as an internet domain, but a brief check showed he didn't have a web page. I sorted by date and found 6 emails from old dated yesterday. No wonder Marge was hovering around her laptop, she was worried I might open her Outlook. I opened the newest email and read as my life seemed to crumble around me. Starting from the bottom, I saw that she had complained about him marking her and how hard it was to hide it from me. His reply was essentially, "It happens, get over it, and to hell with your husband." Her furious reply, sent 14 minutes later, included an interesting paragraph. "I know you don't love your wife, but I do love my husband. I don't want to hurt him or my marriage. It's bad enough that I haven't let him have me much lately. Now, since you marked me, I can't even let him see me naked. I will not be meeting you this Wednesday." The next 2 emails were from him, begging for forgiveness, promising to be gentler in the future, and offering a trip somewhere warm if she could get away. He professed his love for her, sounding like a teenager. The last email from her said she was glad he now understood her position. She would only take trips with her husband and would not meet him this Wednesday. She mentioned that it would take a week for the marks to fade and that she planned to make it up to her husband. Other emails revealed that they had been involved for about 2 months, meeting at a local motel where his company kept a room for long-distance sales staff. One email gave her directions to the place, stating that the company had been renting room 187 for 2 years. It turned out to be the motel across from the bar I had been to recently. Then, a new email arrived from him, replying to her message from the night before. It sent me reeling again. She had emailed him saying she couldn't go without seeing him this week and would meet him Wednesday at 1 p.m., insisting he be gentle this time. His reply was full of praise and promises about making it wonderful for her. I decided right then that they were both going to pay for their actions. I needed to make some plans and would need George's help. I forwarded the most useful emails to George and started making breakfast. When Marge came down around 9:30, she thanked me for letting her sleep in. I said it was only fair since I had crashed out early the night before. She hugged me and whispered, "Don't work too hard today, sweetie. I need you to do your hard work tonight." I ignored the latter part and said, "I'm mostly done out there." I pulled away, saying I'd better get to work. As I was leaving, I glanced back and saw a worried look on her face. She quickly adjusted her expression when she noticed me looking. I said, "Yell if you need anything, babe." She gave a weak okay. I was cleaning the garage when George called. First, he asked if I could talk now. I went outside and told him yes. He said, "I read the emails." "I'm so sorry." He repeated, "I read the emails." "I'm so sorry." "Thanks," I said. "I feel like shit, but at least I know now." "You know when you have some evidence, but you don't have proof for court yet," he noted. "I know. Maybe I can get some pictures of her going in or out of the motel," I replied. "We can do better than that if you want. You just won't be able to use the evidence in court," he said. "Talk to me. I've conducted a few criminal investigations at that motel over the years. The owner is a good guy who doesn't want criminals or druggies around. I can call him tomorrow and get him to print me a key to that room as part of my ongoing investigation. We'll have to find out when Perez won't be there, then we can install the same hidden cameras I used to catch my ex," he explained. "Yes, I want to do that. Not only to catch her but also to get him." "Can you see what you can find on him also?" I asked. "First thing Monday morning, I'll get that ball rolling. Let's see if we can do the install Monday or Tuesday." "We'll need maybe an hour," he answered. We talked a few more minutes. George explained that the equipment was sound and motion activated, and it would transmit to a receiver that had to be within 100 feet. He expected to put the receiver in a utility room somewhere. When I wanted to retrieve the data, I just had to drive to the motel and activate the receiver in my car. The first receiver was also a transmitter. On my signal, it would dump its data to me and then clear its memory. It might take up to 2 hours to send a full day's worth of video. The rest of Sunday was uneventful. My initial thought was to have a quick encounter and be asleep 10 minutes later, but then I changed my mind. I decided to try to stay away from her that night. As soon as she came into the bedroom, I pretended to be asleep. She checked once, then rolled over to her side and slept. I woke early Monday morning and left the house before anyone else was up. I called my office and let them know I wouldn't be in that day, then headed over to George's place. He told me he had called the motel manager and gotten some information. It turns out our lover boy was involved with at least 3 women in his little love nest. The manager thought Perez was a creep who harassed the staff. Perez worked in the room a couple of afternoons a week but was rarely there before 11 a.m. "Well, let's grab our stuff and get going," George said. We loaded the equipment into George's van and drove to the motel. In 10 minutes, George knocked on the manager's door and introduced me as someone working with him on an investigation. The manager, whose name was Kevin, said that would be fine and that he didn't want any illegal activities happening in the motel. He handed George the room key and showed us where the room was located on a map. We saw that there was a utility room about 50 feet away. George asked for a key to it, which Kevin immediately printed out for him. Kevin then called Perez's room to make sure he wasn't there. Not getting an answer, we thanked Kevin and drove the van over to the room. George knocked on the door a couple of times and then let us in with the key. The room was deserted. I stopped suddenly, staring at the bed where my wife had been with another man. After a while, I turned and started helping. In less than 2 hours, the equipment was installed and tested. As we were leaving, I noticed a laptop docking station on the table. "Look, George, he must use his laptop in here," I said. "If I can get in while it's here and he's not, I can install the keylogger on it." George said, "Maybe he leaves it here when he goes to lunch or dinner." "I'll wait outside every day if I need to," I responded. "First, I want to get a GPS on his car so that we don't get surprised." "Don't jump the gun," he answered. "I don't want to risk screwing up the payback. Let's get out of here. I'll buy lunch. How about across the parking lot? Their food is pretty good, and they have a new bartender. She's pretty and easy to talk to." "Sounds good." "I'm hungry," George noted. The bar was deserted when we walked in. I entered first, and Mary saw me, smiled, and waved. Then George stepped in behind me. Mary's face changed to one of shock. She dropped the towel she was using to clean the bar and walked over to us. Ignoring me, she grabbed George in a full-body hug, saying, "George, it's so good to see you again." He hugged her back warmly and said, "Mary, I've wondered how you've been. It looks like you're back on your feet." "I'm so glad." She pulled back, still holding him, and said, "No, I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer, thanks to you." From the sidelines, I said, Mary, I'd like you to meet my good friend George." They both laughed. Mary released George and put both of her hands on mine, saying, "I've liked you since we first met. Now that I know you're George's friend, that matters a lot." I smiled and said, "George can be a bit of a butthole, but he's okay." She grinned and said, "George and I go back a couple of years, but I've never thought of him as a butthole. Must be a guy thing." Mary continued taking care of drink orders for the 4 other patrons but always came back to talk to us when she was done. Among other things, I learned that she was working as much as possible to save money to enter nursing school in about 5 months. Around 2 in the afternoon, George and I were the only customers left. I commented on that, and Mary said it was always deserted in the afternoons. She added, "I don't make any tip money, which sucks, but I usually use the time to study." Then, grinning at us, she concluded, "But it's a lot nicer talking with you guys." The 3 of us chatted for another half hour when suddenly Mary, looking rather solemn, turned to George and said, "George, I'm going to tell him." George just returned her gaze and gave a slow nod. She turned to me and said, "If we're going to be friends, I don't want any secrets. Maybe when I tell you, you might not want to think of me as a friend. I'll understand, but I won't hide my life from you, and I don't want you to find out from someone else." I saw her reach for George's hand. She clasped it tightly and said, "Let me tell you how I met George. He arrested me." She continued, "He took me to a filthy holding cell in some cold dungeon he has on that base. I broke down when I saw the cell. It didn't matter to him, he just pushed me in and began closing the door. Then he stopped and watched me cry. He started yelling at me, telling me how I was ruining my life and how stupid I was being. Suddenly, I realized he wasn't yelling that I was a useless person, which is what I was. He was telling me that I was hurting myself. Nobody had ever said that to me before, but I heard him then. I lost it. I collapsed on that horrible, dirty mattress and bawled like a kid. George sat down next to me and uttered one word. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "He asked me why." Nothing more. Looking at George, she continued, "For the first and only time in my life, I spilled my guts, crying hysterically at times. I told him everything. I don't know how long it took, it must have been hours that George sat there with me. When I was finally done, he just stared at me for the longest time. Then he got up, softly squeezed my shoulder, and then locked me in that cell. He left me there for 14 hours. I didn't see anybody, didn't hear anything. I was cold and hungry the entire time, coming down off a high. Finally, he returned and told me it was time to see the judge. Normally, you get a chance to clean up and put on a fresh jail suit before appearing in court. Not me. He made me go in as I was. The defense attorney didn't say anything. The judge was about to sentence me to jail when suddenly George stood up and asked to address the court. I'll never forget what he said or what he looked like in his full dress uniform. I can quote him verbatim to this day, but what matters is that he told the judge that justice would not be served if he remanded me to jail. He wanted me in rehab. The judge and the attorney looked shocked. With reason, I was an addict, a troublemaker, and a three-time loser who was obviously guilty of the crimes George had charged me with. And suddenly, hard-nosed George was on my side. After some hesitation, the judge gave me a chance at 90-day rehab with 4 years of hard time if I screwed up. I jumped on it. Looking back at George, she said, I haven't touched anything since the day George helped me. Stepping back and looking at both of us, she added softly, George, David, I don't walk the streets now, but I am still struggling. It's the only way I can save money for school and provide for my daughter. But if you two don't want to talk to me anymore, I understand. I'm sorry. George found himself being hugged from both sides. He said, as long as you keep fighting, I'm in your corner. You'll make it. I know you will. I added, Mary, I'm glad we met and happy to think of you as my friend. It was a good thing the bar was deserted and we were in a dark corner. Mary just held us and cried. Monday evening, Marge got in around 5:30 with Chinese dinner in her hands. She came over to kiss me, but I just grabbed the bags and took them to the counter while saying, Great, we're all starved. When I turned around, she was looking at me with a pensive expression. I said, why don't you change clothes in the bathroom while I get things ready? Her face paled as I turned away and started to get the dishes out of the cabinet. Whatever she was going to say slipped out into silence. I was still furious over a lie. Dinner was a quiet affair and the kids noticed but didn't say anything. Marge wasn't too hungry, but I made a point of eating a lot. Marge made several attempts at conversation, which I mostly ignored. Then I realized I was being petty and my behavior was just cheap. I didn't want her to call off the affair before I had evidence. I made a point of shaking my head and said, Sorry, everyone, I've been distracted by a work problem and brought my troubles home. Let's start over. How was everyone's day? We chatted through dinner with a semblance of normality. I made sure to smile at Marge a couple of times and to be attentive to her. Marge went to bed ahead of me. I pushed the thermostat up about 5 degrees. After waiting an hour, I checked the voice recorders but again found nothing of interest. I walked into our bedroom, it must have been 77 degrees. I got ready for bed, climbed in, and rolled away from her without saying anything. She quietly said, Night, honey, without rolling over. I asked, Why are you wearing that flannel top? It's certainly not cold in here. She was silent for a moment and then said, Honey, I'm just cold, that's all. I decided to push it. I rolled over to her and embraced her. She hugged me back, but she felt really sweaty. Are you feeling sick? I asked with concern. She replied, I don't think so. I've just been cold at night lately. I held her close and said, I know a few ways to warm you up. She stiffened, sighed, and said, David, I'm sorry. I'm just too tired. I rolled away and said, It's okay. Marge moved to me and spooned me, saying, I'm just too tired tonight. Tell you what, Wednesday, I had an easy day. I'll rock your socks off Wednesday night. I just murmured, It's okay. After a few seconds, she pulled away and went back to her side of the bed. Things were cold. Tuesday morning, I left at the normal time and drove to work. George called to let me know he had installed the GPS on Perez's car the night before and gave me the website and login information. I checked out the site. It showed him across town. Deciding it was time to check the bedroom voice recorder, I let the office know I would be back in a couple of hours and drove home. Marge had received a call from her best friend Ashley Monday morning. Almost immediately, Marge told her she had had incredible moments that weekend. Ashley squealed, "Did you have a meeting with Will this weekend?" So Ashley knows, I thought, wondering if her husband Mike knew and didn't tell me. That pig, I thought. No, Marge replied. I wanted to have some time with David this Sunday night, but it didn't happen. I wanted to connect with him Saturday night like usual, but he spent all day working outside and was too tired. Marge replied, "Is David better in bed than Will?" Ashley shot back, "Oh yes, making love with David is always better." Marge replied, "Then why are you seeing Will?" With a smile in her voice. "It's different," Marge said. "David makes love to me. I feel so safe with him. Will just treats me poorly. It feels good, but I'd never want David to just use me like that. But both are good." I know that doesn't make any sense, does it? It does to me, girlfriend, Ashley said. It's the thrill, the raw passion, spreading your legs for a special friend. Oh, I know, Marge agreed. That's why I started seeing Brian Sears last year. Then she giggled and added, "Plus, he has that horse-sized thing." Ashley giggled back, "Yeah, that's why you stopped seeing him. That horse-sized thing made you bull-legged. God, I was always so sore after he did me. He is gentle, but it's one thick tool. It's fun to fondle and neat to just look at and say, damn." Ashley added, "Hey, next month, Mike will be out of town for 5 days. I think I'm going to let Brian drill me on the first day. I'll be sore for the next few days but should be fine when Mike comes back." Really? Damn, Marge said. I thought you were done with him. I am, since last year. I thought Mike was getting suspicious, but Brian and I keep in touch. With Mike away for 5 days, I thought I'd indulge myself. You'll tell me all about it? Marge asked. Ashley countered, "Only if you tell me all about Wednesday with Will and David, including all the dirty details." Deal. Then Ashley asked, "How's your mark?" Marge replied, "The mark is fading, but I can't let David see it for another 3 or 4 days. I've been changing in the bathroom and putting flannels on at night. He hasn't noticed." Ashley asked, "You'd better be careful. Has he said anything about the lack of intimacy?" "No, but I have to take care of that," Marge said, then giggled. "I was thinking, I never had a chance to do this before, but I was thinking about confronting David Wednesday night. I've never had 2 issues in the same day before." Ashley said, "I've done that a couple of times. It's a real turn-on. Just make sure you buy a douche before you do David. That stuff goes deep." Marge said she would, and then they said their goodbyes. I thought about telling Mike and risking ruining his life. That seemed wrong. But then I remembered thinking he might be an a-hole for knowing and not telling me. He would want to know, just like me. I would give him a copy of this recording after I took care of Perez. The next call of interest was again Ashley from earlier that morning. Their conversation had a different tone from Monday's. Marge called and said hi to Ashley. Ashley immediately sensed something was off and asked what was wrong. "David noticed that I was wearing flannels and changing in the bathroom with the door closed," Marge explained. "He asked me about it when he got in bed. I told him that I was cold, but Ashley, the room was so hot I was sweating all night in those heavy flannels. I don't think he believed me, but he didn't press further. Then David wanted to be intimate, but I couldn't risk him seeing the mark. Sunday, I had unplugged the nightlight, but David fixed it. So I told him no again. He seemed hurt, and I tried to make up for it by telling him that I'd be available on Wednesday, but it didn't seem to matter. We just lay there, this invisible wall between us. Worse, my mind kept wandering back to Will, not David. I closed the file and saved it. I didn't need to hear any more. Digging through the internet, I ordered a forensic kit and had it shipped to my office. Next, I drove over to the motel. Perez's car was parked near his room, but it was lunchtime. I walked over to the bar. Mary wasn't working, but through the front window, I saw Perez in a booth, looking over the menu. I figured now was as good a time as any. I went back to his motel door and knocked. No answer. So I used the key to open it. Ignoring the bed, I went straight to the next room where his laptop was open, displaying a QuickBooks accounting screen. I pulled out my thumb drive, inserted it, and installed the keylogger program. This time, I skipped screen captures and focused on collecting emails, websites, keystrokes, everything, including accounting data. If he was up to something that I could use against him, I'd find it. I also enabled his remote desktop client and made sure the motel's wireless had the right port open. It did. Finally, I set up a remote control software account under his domain name, installed the software, and removed all traces from the desktop, system tray, and start menu. With everything in place, I left his QuickBooks screen up and got out of there. Back at the office, I worked for a few hours, feeling oddly upbeat. When I got home, I was in a good mood, helpful with the kids. Marge looked relieved to see me acting normally. Around 10, she mentioned it was bedtime. I've got some work to finish, I told her. I'll be up in a bit. Great, I'll see you in the morning, she replied. Yeah, just great, I thought bitterly. Rest up so you can meet your lover tomorrow. I had a mountain of data to sort through, today's footage, files from the bugs, data from Marge and Willie's computers, and phone records. But it wasn't going to happen tonight. I downloaded the data from her car's recorder and placed it back in her vehicle. She was either asleep or pretending to be by the time I got into bed. I lay as far away from her as possible, thinking, tomorrow's the day. Marge was up before me Wednesday morning, which was just as well. I felt sick knowing she was going to betray me again today and that I'd have to watch the recording of her with him. In the kitchen, she was finishing breakfast, fully dressed for work unusual for her. Just in time, sweetie. Good morning, she said. I grunted and grabbed coffee. After a couple of sips, I turned back to her, noticing her puzzled expression. Sorry, I said. Still half asleep. You're usually more chipper in the mornings, she replied. Now you know how I feel most mornings, I muttered, sitting down without further comment. The kids came in, and Marge served breakfast. Normally, I'd help her, but not today. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed she kept glancing at me. When she placed my plate in front of me, she paused, staring at me. I pretended not to notice. As I was about to leave, she stepped in front of me, concern etched on her face. David, is something wrong? I stared blankly. Not that I know of. Then, out of nowhere, I hugged her. She relaxed into my arms, clearly relieved. I'm glad, she said. I was worried. I love you, I told her. I can't imagine my life without you. There's no one else I want to be close to. She tensed slightly, let out a soft sob, and whispered, of course, I feel the same. And I'm planning to spend time with you tonight, she added. I pulled away abruptly and left without looking back. I drove to the motel and downloaded the data while waiting for Marge to head to work. I got back home just after 9 a.m. and spent the time in the parking lot wondering how I was going to get through the day. How was I supposed to act normally knowing what I was about to do? And how could I bring myself to watch the video of her with another man? Downloading the data from the bugs took time. While it copied, I wandered around the house, feeling aimless. I knew there was no way I could talk to Marge tonight, let alone share a bed with her. I started by combing through his emails. After a couple of hours, I'd gathered some basic facts. Perez had 3 companies that bought products cheaply and resold them to the local military base, several Fortune 500 companies, and the federal government. He was involved with 5 other women besides my wife. The guy was busier than I thought. I came across a few emails discussing product quality and specifications, and I saved a couple for further follow-up. Not much, but it was a start. Next, I copied his 3 QuickBooks company files and used the Keylogger program to find his logins and passwords. Still, nothing major came up. I'm no CPA, but I did notice under expenses that he had 6 company credit cards, even noting the card numbers in the descriptions. Listening to his phone conversations took a while but was well worth the effort. I started seeing correlations between some emails and what he was discussing on the phone. One call was from someone in the base's shipping and receiving department. The guy mentioned having trouble processing the last shipment because of duplicate serial numbers. Worse, all future shipments had to have unique serial numbers. Perez was furious, making it clear he wasn't happy. The man explained that new auditing software would flag any irregularities, so they needed to be more cautious. After the call, Perez went online and ordered 2 specialized printers and supplies. Another call was with a supplier, who wanted Perez to buy from him. After some back and forth, Perez said, "Look, the qualification process takes forever, it's just how it is. But I like you and want to help. The chief of procurement for the base makes the decisions, but he listens to his procurement agent. I can get him to help you, but it'll cost you." "How much?" the supplier asked, sounding resigned. "5,000 cash, Perez replied. "That'll let you sell 100 grand's worth of goods to the base. To help you out, you can raise your price by 2%, no problem. Future orders won't cost quite as much." The supplier perked up. "Okay. How do I get the money to you?" "Let me know when it's ready, and I'll tell you where to meet me. 2 days later, your bid will be accepted." The next call came from a guy in the base's procurement section, where Marge worked. He gave Perez the amounts that several competitors had submitted on various contracts. Other than that, there were 4 more calls of interest, all from his women. One of the calls was from my wife. It was the same conversation I had already overheard from the car recorder. Taking a break, I decided to get organized. I set up folders on the flash drive for videos, audio files, data, and miscellaneous info. I moved everything I had gathered into the appropriate folders and made a backup. It was time to call George. He sympathized with me for a few minutes before I told him I needed his help in an official capacity. He listened closely and said, "Excellent. Although I can't use your evidence in court, it'll unofficially help my investigation. We've been looking into the shipping and receiving department for months now. Inventory goes missing, sometimes whole shipments. The paperwork doesn't show any issues, but physical inventories reveal duplicate serial numbers and substandard materials. I need to see what you've got as soon as possible." "I've got to be out of the house before Marge gets home," I said. "I can meet you at your office this afternoon." "No, let's meet at my apartment at 3 p.m. I don't want anyone else involved just yet. Dinner and drinks are on me. You need to drown the pain a little." "I'll drive, you're getting drunk," George said firmly. I agreed, and we signed off. That was the plan. I'd hang out with George tonight and get completely wasted. By the time I got home, Marge would be asleep, and tomorrow I could use the hangover as an excuse to avoid her. My stomach turned as it neared 1 p.m. Marge would be with him soon. I called her cell phone and got her voicemail. She clearly didn't want to talk to me. I left a message, saying I was going to see George and would be late. I got back to work, starting with the video capture files from Monday to this morning. That's when I got my first surprise. Early Monday afternoon, a woman let herself in with her own key card. Perez jumped up from his desk, swept her into his arms, and kissed her passionately. Then they disappeared into the bedroom together. I saved the file. Tuesday morning, Perez had a brief encounter with a housekeeper, and Tuesday afternoon, another one knocked on his door. He let her in, handed her some cash, and she, well, took care of him in a way that left no doubts about their arrangement. I saved the scenes for future use. It was about time to meet George, so I did a full backup, making an extra copy for him. George picked me up, and we spent a couple of hours going over everything I had found. Then we headed to the bar. We stayed there until about 1 a.m., but after that, my memory's a bit fuzzy. Thursday morning, I woke up around 9 o'clock. The house was quiet, Marge and the kids were long gone. A note on the table read, "Since you were so drunk last night, you didn't set your alarm. I'm not your wake-up service." I chuckled, thinking, she's mad. Good. At least I won't have to work too hard at staying away from her today. I called the office and told them I was sick, then headed to the motel to collect the footage I'd been dreading. On the way back, George called. The investigation was gaining momentum. The man who offered the $5,000 bribe had agreed to wear a wire. Perez and his team's shady practices had been mapped out, and a preliminary report had been sent to the base command. They were expecting a raid on Perez's office, motel room, and home in about 10 days. His computers would be seized, and George warned me to make sure there were no traces of the keylogger sending data to me. I assured him there wouldn't be. Then George hit me with something big. Since there was a leak coming from procurement, Marge is now considered a person of interest. I almost told him that was ridiculous, Marge wouldn't steal. But then I remembered, I used to think she'd never cheat either. We agreed to talk the next day. I got home and downloaded the data from the motel and house, then started reviewing the Wednesday footage until around 12:30. Afterward, I checked Perez's emails and found what seemed to be 2 other vendors bribing him. I forwarded those to George. I also found a few emails from his women. A couple of them gave specific dates and times when they'd be meeting him, which I made note of for my own purposes. Finally, it was time. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to watch the video of Marge. I fast-forwarded until I saw her enter the motel room. I paused, just sitting there, feeling like I'd been gutted. Hollow, sick, furious, destroyed. Eventually, I hit play again and watched them embrace, kissing each other passionately. They didn't say much, other than her asking him to be gentler as they undressed and moved to the bed. Tears streamed down my face as I watched them. He was doing everything to her that she used to do for me. It was like a sick replay of our own moments together, but with another man. I fast-forwarded to the part where she lay back on the bed, opening herself up to him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Thursday evening was quiet. The kids were out, and Marge and I mostly kept to ourselves. After everyone went to bed, I switched up the data recorder in her car and copied the new files. I couldn't resist checking the latest recordings. I figured she would have talked to Ashley on the way to work. Marge wouldn't call from home since I had been sleeping off the hangover in the bedroom, and the kids were around. Sure enough, Ashley called, asking how it went. Marge answered, "It was fine with Will. I made him be gentler, so I'm not sore today. He's still too rough and makes me do things I don't really want to, but I did enjoy our time together." Ashley's voice was quieter. "But with David, let me guess. Either he was too quick or he couldn't get it up, right?" "No," Marge groaned. "He didn't even show up. He went out and got drunk with one of his buddies. Staggered and late, reeking of alcohol, and collapsed into bed without saying a word to me." Ashley asked, "So what did you do?" "What could I do? I just lay there, furious, while he snored," Marge replied. "This morning, I turned off his alarm clock, wrote him a nasty note, and left." Ashley sighed, "You know, sometimes people go out and have a wild night. Sounds like bad timing, that's all." "No," Marge wailed. "I gave him hints about what I wanted last night, and the morning before, I told him I planned to spend time with him that evening. He didn't say anything, just went to work without even a goodbye." "Do you think he's suspicious or knows something?" Ashley asked. "No," he can't know, Marge replied. I only see Will when David's at work. But I do think David's upset that we've only been having moments once a week for a while now. I think he's trying to punish me. Ashley wasn't convinced. That's a stretch. I'm right, Marge insisted. He could have been with me last night, the first Wednesday in months, but he turned me down cold. Then she added, but honestly, I really wanted to be with both of them yesterday, even if it would have left me sore again. Damn David's ego. He's going to find it quite chilly in the bedroom for a while now. Ashley chuckled and said, Marge, it's your own pride that's making you want both of them in the same day. Just let it go, at least for now. Besides, you've been holding back from David for months. He might see that as you trying to control him, and he could be pushing back by turning you down. Ashley explained, he can't be happy with that, and you'd better solve that before worrying about the other things. That's what I was trying to do, give David more attention, Marge exclaimed. No, you made last night about what you wanted, not what David needed, Ashley reminded her. You're right. So, what do I do now? Let it go, Ashley advised. Maybe he didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Just assume that's the case and move forward. There's a good chance David will want to be close to you tonight. I saved that conversation, thinking, well, I really upset her, but at least I won't have to deal with it for now. A few minutes later, Ashley called again. Hey Marge, she started, you said what makes you do things you don't want to. Why do you let him? Well, he can be assertive and do what he wants, was Marge's reply. I've managed to get him to be gentler, but he's just a rough lover. Ashley, curious, asked, what kind of things does he make you do? Yesterday, Marge said, he had me kneeling on the floor with the back of my head against the bed, and he was a bit too forceful. I couldn't get away from it, and it was uncomfortable. That sounds tough, Ashley noted. He also likes to talk a bit too openly, and expects me to say things back. It's not really my thing, but it seems to be important to him. Ashley responded, men. Exactly, Marge agreed. I think he watches too many of those movies and believes they're realistic. That sounds frustrating, Ashley sympathized. Yeah, it was odd. But after I said what he wanted, Ashley sympathized, yeah, it was odd. But after I said what he wanted, things were better. Later, Thursday evening, Marge made it clear she wanted to be close, but I ignored her. I didn't go to bed until almost 2 a.m., and she was already asleep. Sorry, Ashley, but you were wrong. Friday morning, I was up early and went straight to work. I left around 3 p.m., taking the test kit with me, and stopped by the motel to get Thursday's and today's videos. Mary wasn't working at the bar, but I had a drink while the data downloaded. When I got home, I started copying the files and used the test kit on Marge's things. The results were positive, but it didn't really change anything. With a little time left, I reviewed the new videos, and to this day, I wish I hadn't. The first file showed a young woman, probably in her early 20s, entering the room. She looked nervous, but they had a couple of glasses of wine, and he made his move. At first, she seemed to go along, but when things got more serious, she became uncomfortable and said she wanted to leave. He didn't let her, and I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the file and rushed to the bathroom. When I recovered, I made a copy for George. Deciding to continue, I clicked on the next file and saw something that surprised me. Mary was there. She told us she worked as an escort, but it still shocked me to see her in action. The final file showed Marge entering the room, greeting him, and then leaving shortly after. I saved these files for George as well. I called him and said we needed to meet right away. He suggested coming over, but it was too close to the time Marge could return, so I asked to meet at his office. 10 minutes later, he answered the door. I handed him the flash drive and said, there are 4 files on this. The first one is the most important, but I couldn't watch it through. I'm sorry you have to. I waited in the car as he watched. Almost an hour later, George opened the car door and got in. He looked at me and said, "I don't know who she is, but I'll find out. And Perez is going to pay." Buckling his seatbelt, he added, "To the bar, James. I don't want a drink. I want answers, especially from Mary." Mary was sitting at the bar, though she wasn't working. When she spotted us, she waved to the bartender to get us a couple of gin and tonics. After he set them down in front of us, she hugged George, squeezed my hand, and said, "Hi guys, it's always good to see you too." "Hi Mary, great to see you too," I said absent-mindedly. George stared at her and asked, "Mary, what's wrong?" Her face fell, and she admitted, "George, you were right. I've picked up an infection, and that's why I can't work at the bar anymore. I'm done with that life. I don't want to risk anyone else, and I'm through with worrying about school. I'm just going to get by however I can, without becoming a nurse or continuing, you know." Before I could say anything, George jumped in, "You're not done with school, and you are going to be a nurse." Mary just shook her head and said, "No, I can make it with this job if I don't have to save for school. It's good enough." George grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "No, it's not good enough, not even close. You've worked for this every day since you told me about wanting to be a nurse in that jail cell. I'm glad you're leaving that life behind, but I won't let you give up now." I added, "We'll find another way, Mary." She looked at us with tears in her eyes. I couldn't ask for better friends, but I can't, and I won't, ask for help. That wouldn't be fair. George and I exchanged a glance before I said, "Good. You're not asking, and since you can't stop us, the matter is settled." We all laughed, and I followed up with, "George, aren't there some job openings coming up on base soon?" Before he could respond, Mary got serious again. "Guys, there's something else I need to tell you. First, I know you're keeping an eye on Perez. I can see his room's door from the front windows of the bar. I really hope you can stop him soon." George's face hardened as he nodded. "The first thing I did after finding out about my infection," Mary continued, "was I confronted him." I gasped, "Why?" She glared at me, "Because it was the only way I could make him pay for what he's done." In a low voice, George asked, "Mary, what did he do to you?" "He didn't do anything to me directly," she said, her voice softening. "But I saw him hurt someone else, a girl, barely more than 20. I was heading to work, and I saw her stumble out of his room. She could barely walk. I went over to help, but all she let me do was help her to her car. She was crying, her face bruised, her clothes torn. I think she was in the Air National Guard, one of your own, George." George clenched his fists. "I'll find her," he promised. "And I'll make sure Perez regrets everything he's done." Turning to me, he added, "I suspect David's got more ideas brewing and I'll need to hear what you've got in mind." By midnight, I was finally heading to bed. Marge was already asleep, and George knew all my plans. He was also going to see if Mary could fit into base procurement with the upcoming job openings. Saturday was quiet. Marge and I didn't talk much. That evening, we had our usual movie night, but when I arrived with the drinks, Marge was sitting between Tom and Julia on the sofa, with me relegated to an armchair. The kids looked uncomfortable, and Marge, for her part, looked smug. She went to bed early, so I used the time to check the voice recorders but found nothing suspicious. The only email I saw from Perez was a brief thank you to Marge for the relief on Friday and a note looking forward to next Wednesday. Sunday passed in silence. We went through the motions of daily life, but nothing more. I went to bed slightly earlier than Marge, but I noticed she still went into the bathroom to change into her pajamas. She had to know her lies and actions were pulling us further apart. She got into bed, rolling away from me roughly enough to wake me, but I said nothing. I was fine with her keeping her distance. On Monday afternoon, George called to tell me he had found the girl who had been assaulted. She had gone to a civilian hospital and, after some time, was willing to testify against Perez. He also let me know they were planning the raid for next Monday morning and asked me to keep things calm with Marge to avoid tipping Perez off. I agreed and told him I would tell Marge I'd be out of town from Wednesday to Sunday, though I'd actually be staying at the motel, keeping an eye on things. Monday night at dinner, I told Marge and the kids I had to leave town for a few days. Julia and Tom expressed their feelings, but Marge didn't react. On Tuesday, Marge and I basically didn't talk. I packed a bag and put it in my car. After everyone went to bed, I checked the voice recorders. Only one conversation was interesting. It was from Marge to Ashley. Marge said, "Ashley, this situation is ruining everything. David's been confusing me. He said he's going out of town Wednesday morning and won't be back until Sunday. I won't have a chance to see them both on the same day. Damn it." Ashley replied, "Marge, you need to address your problems with your husband before worrying about your fantasies. This has gone on long enough." Marge responded, "If David would stop being difficult, I'd be able to enjoy our time together more. I just don't understand why he has to be so challenging." I saved the file and went to work early Wednesday. I left around noon to check into the motel, set up video equipment, and got everything ready. I watched Marge arrive and go to his room. Turning on the live feed, I saw her hug and kiss him. She then connected her laptop to the motel's internet and they both worked on their computers for about 10 minutes. Once done, he picked her up and carried her to the bed. I turned the sound down and logged in remotely to their laptops while they undressed each other. They were intimate for almost 2 hours before falling asleep in each other's arms. They woke up around 5 p.m. I had 4 hours of access to their computers. As they started waking up, I logged out but kept watching. Marge woke up first, checked the time, and nudged him awake. He groggily asked what time it was. Marge said, "A little after 5. I have to get going. I promised my wife I'd take her out to dinner." He playfully replied, "Me too. I don't want to hear about your husband and kids." As he started getting up, she apologized for what she said earlier. She admitted to feeling jealous and expressed her love for her husband, stating that she needed to make up for neglecting him. She also mentioned that she couldn't risk ruining her marriage. He replied, "I'm glad you haven't been with your husband lately. I like thinking of your body being mine alone." Marge said, "It's not yours. I choose to share it with you, but I love my husband and I need to make it up to him. I do love our time together, but I can't risk my marriage." He got up and said, "I don't want my wife finding out either. Damn, my shoulders are sore." Marge apologized for scratching him and looked at the marks. She was visibly distressed, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause you pain. I feel sore." They got cleaned up and dressed. He gave her a peck on the cheek and a quick touch, saying, "Take care and I'll see you soon." She kissed him back, and they parted ways. From the window, I saw her walk away, noticing how her walk suggested she was sore. On Thursday and Friday, I alternated between work and my projects. On Thursday afternoon, Marge called him, saying that she couldn't see him anymore and was ending the affair. They had a brief argument but promised to talk again soon. Late Friday evening, I completed the final transfers between computers, sent emails, and deleted the keyloggers from both Marge's and Perez's laptops. I accessed Marge's computer through Perez's, knowing the IP address would show the motel's location. I forwarded all active documents to Perez and drove back home on Sunday afternoon. I picked up the 4 voice recorders and cleared them without listening to them. George could have them in the one from her car back now. Then, I unpacked and got a drink. Julia and Marge got home shortly after having been to the grocery store. Tom arrived as we were putting things away, and we had a quiet last night. On Monday morning, while I was at work, I received a call from our family doctor's office around 11 a.m. The receptionist asked me to come in immediately, but only today. When I inquired about the reason, she mentioned that the doctor wanted to see me, but didn't provide details. When I expressed that I couldn't take off work on short notice without a reason, she had Dr. Benson speak to me directly. Dr. Benson informed me, "David, I need you to come to the office as soon as possible for some tests. I understand your concern, but it's important." I replied, "Doctor, I'll be there, but can you tell me what this is about? I need to know if I should be preparing for immediate surgery or updating my will." Dr. Benson sighed and said, "Okay, David. Your wife came in this morning feeling unwell. The tests show that she has 3 sexually transmitted diseases. She claimed she has only been with you, so it's likely you were infected and passed them to her." I responded, "I'll come right over." When I arrived, the normally friendly staff seemed unusually serious. A nurse led me to an exam room and took a blood sample using a large needle, which was quite painful. About an hour later, Dr. Benson entered with a puzzled expression and began speaking. "David, you don't have any venereal diseases." I apologized for my earlier statement. I assumed Marge was truthful, but she wasn't. I said, "I'm relieved to hear that. Marge and I haven't been intimate in a while, so I now know she's been unfaithful." Dr. Benson handed me a copy of my test results. At that moment, my cell phone rang. It was my daughter. I said to the doctor, "I'm sorry, but my daughter never calls during the day unless it's an emergency." Dr. Benson nodded, and I answered the call to hear Julia sobbing. "Daddy, what's going on? Mom told us you've been cheating on her and gave her a disease. How could you?" I reassured her, "Julia, I'm at the doctor's now. I don't have any venereal diseases. Let me put Dr. Benson on the line to confirm." After speaking with Dr. Benson, Julia sobbed, "Daddy, I'm so sorry for doubting you. Mom was so cold when she told us, we just believed her." I told her, "It's okay, sweetheart. Just tell your brother the truth, but please don't mention our conversation to your mother. I'll be home soon." When I went to the receptionist to pay my copay, she handed me some papers. "These are copies of your test results showing that you're clean. Unfortunately, I made a mistake and gave you copies of your wife's report as well. We can't share her medical details due to regulations." She smiled at me and I realized Marge might not be treated well at this office. I thanked her and headed home for the confrontation. Upon arriving home, I saw that Marge's parents had been invited. I parked in the garage and entered the kitchen. From the living room, I could hear voices talking and sobbing. My father-in-law, a retired coal miner and a large man, was there, red-faced and glaring at me with hatred. His clenched fists made it clear he was angry. He snarled, "You cheated on my daughter and gave her a disease. I'm going to deal with you." I knew I had to act quickly to avoid a confrontation. I walked over to him, put my face inches from his, and said, "If I had done that, you have every right to be angry." But I didn't. His rage mixed with confusion as he asked, "Tell me quickly." I handed him copies of both medical reports. He read them multiple times, then just stared at the pages while the commotion in the living room grew louder. Eventually, he looked up and said, "You're clean. My daughter has a venereal disease, but it wasn't from you. She lied and cheated on you." I explained, "We've been having problems and haven't been intimate in a while, so I'm clear of any diseases. I appreciate you listening. My marriage might be over, and maybe my life too, but I'm glad you heard me out." As we headed towards the living room, he stopped and asked, "Marge said she has one STD, but you mentioned diseases. Are there more?" I answered, "Yes, she also has syphilis." His expression tightened, and he said, "Let's go have a talk." I grabbed him by his shirt and shoved him against the countertop. Now it was my turn to take control. "She's your daughter, but she's my wife," I hissed. "She should never have involved her parents or our children in this, but she did. My daughter Julia called me in tears. I don't know what my son thinks yet. You're here because she dragged you and them into this, but that's all. Understand? He stared at me, his rage barely contained. I added, I don't care what you hear. This is about my family. You stay out of it. Got it? Quietly, he said, yes, I understand. I released him, and we walked into the living room. Both Marge and her mother were shouting at me. Tom was sitting in a chair, crying, and Julia rushed over to me, wrapping her arms around me. Daddy, I love you, she said. Tom joined her, and I found myself embraced by both of my children, while my mother-in-law cursed at me and Marge cried. Julia looked at the papers in my hand and asked, is this the proof? I nodded. She took the papers and stepped back, guilt evident on her face, as she began reading the medical reports. She showed Tom the crucial parts and they exchanged glances before hugging me even tighter. Marge's mother, still angry, shouted, how can you two hug that cheating person? He gave your mother a disease. Marge cried even harder on the sofa. Julia approached her grandmother and offered her both medical reports, pointing out the lines that proved I was clean, but Marge was not. My mother-in-law buried her face in her hands. Marge screamed, what's so different? That person cheated on me and gave me an STD. Julia, her face showing a mix of emotions, knelt in front of Marge and pointed out the lines in the reports that confirmed I was clean. Marge's face drained of color as she processed the information. Julia said, Mom, you lied to us. You cheated on Dad. You're a liar. Marge, in a fit of anger, swung her hand at Julia, but my daughter's reflexes were quick and she blocked the hit. Mother, don't ever try to hit me again. You've lost that right. I love you, but you tried to turn us against Dad to cover your own actions. I can never forgive that. Returning to me, Julia and Tom hugged me again. Marge stared at us and quickly tried to defend herself. Kids, your father must have given me the disease accidentally a few weeks ago. He didn't know he was infected. He must have had symptoms and gone to a clinic for treatment. We haven't been intimate in a while. I've asked David to be with me, but he refused. With a pleading look, Marge continued, I haven't cheated on my husband. I never would. But he set me up to look like I did. I thought that if we had been intimate after I was infected, you would be too. I didn't mean for this to happen. I can't expect you to forgive me or want to be with me anymore. I've destroyed my family and my life. If I had leaked any information, jail would be a good place for me. I have nothing left, but that I did not do. I asked Marge, did you ever take your laptop to his private spaces? She nodded a couple of times, saying, it let me get some work done while still having the afternoons off. I shouted, the afternoons off work so you could be with him? Wincing, she nodded. Did he ever have access to your laptop? Did you ever finish with him and then take a shower or fall asleep while still connected to the office network? She again nodded without looking up at me. I grabbed her laptop and booted it up quickly, then went over and turned off our internet access. I had scheduled a mass email to look like it was sent by Perez, but with the internet access turned off, the emails couldn't be sent. However, there was another issue to address. Pretending to be surprised that I needed a password, I had her tell me what it was. After a bit, I looked up and said, Marge, he put a remote control program on your computer so he could see everything. There is a login for Perez. Her head flashed up, shocked. He set me up, she wailed, nodding. I said, yes, it looks like he wanted more from you than just your company. I continued, besides that, he set up a program to send his email link to every contact you have, family, friends, coworkers, everyone. This is his way of getting even. Marge just collapsed onto herself, and her mother hugged her again. But this might be enough to keep you out of trouble, I added. All three stared at me, so I continued, this shows that he had remote control of your computer and could use it to obtain sensitive data. Right now, George thinks you sent those documents to Perez. This evidence could show that Perez was responsible. The website logs IP addresses, so if you're telling the truth, it will show Perez logging into your computer at the times the emails went out. It may clear you. The other part of my plan was that I had installed surveillance software on Perez's computer and copied all the video files to his hard drive. It now looks like he was guilty of recording these scenes. The video of the assault was included, and since it looked like these were his videos, they were admissible in court. Perez was in more trouble than he knew. I also sent audio files of his blackmail attempts to his computer. George would be able to use those as well. Finally, from Perez's computer, I logged into Marge's and sent him her active quotes. The login website would show that it went from Perez's location to Marge's computer. Fast forward a few months, after Perez's final criminal sentencing hearing, he was convicted of assault and filming unauthorized videos. Once released from prison, he would have to register as a sex offender. He was also convicted of theft, fraud, extortion, and racketeering. Marge had to testify about her affair in several court trials, all of which made the newspapers and evening news. Reports stated that Perez never wavered in proclaiming his innocence regarding the website and the hidden cameras. However, since the programs and files were found on his computer and the young lady testified about her assault, the court took a harsher stance. He was sentenced to a total of 23 years in prison, with 11 years before any chance of parole. On the day he entered prison, both the IRS and state tax authorities served notice on Perez, seeking back taxes on the bribes he received and auditing his companies. On his second day in prison, his wife served him with divorce papers. A week later, George and I were sitting in the bar where Mary no longer worked. Her new job in base procurement allowed her to quit the bar and start nursing school in the evening. I reminded George to tell me what I owed him for the recording devices I had donated to Perez. He promised he would and then, grinning widely, added, "Also, you and I spent $1,500 apiece yesterday. Good for us." I replied, "This gin and tonic isn't as good as Mary's, but it's not bad either." Ignoring my comment, George continued, "It just happens that I know the supervisor of the guards at Perez's facility. I happened to see the guy at his favorite bar the other day. He mentioned Perez and said he followed the trials, thinking I did a great job bringing a real scumbag to justice. I told him I wasn't done with Perez yet and wanted him to suffer every day in prison. Then he slid a newspaper over to me. Underneath was an envelope with $3,000. The white gang has been told that Perez consorted with a black woman. The black gang knows he mistreated a black woman. The military guys have learned he brutally assaulted one of our own. The guard's job is to ensure that Perez stays alive and suffers throughout his sentence. After that, I don't care." I stared at George for a long time before finally saying, "Thanks." At that moment, Mike walked into the bar. He looked around and walked over to us. I ordered a new round of drinks. The new bartender was making better gin and tonics. I had expected Mike to show up tonight. I had told him where I would be. Earlier that afternoon, with regret, I handed him a copy of the file detailing our wives' infidelities and what had transpired between Marge and me. Mike sipped his gin and then turned to George, saying, "George, I'd like to rent some surveillance equipment from you." And so it began again. 2 weeks later, Perez had a civil hearing concerning his tax evasion charges. I didn't know about it, but it was clear Marge was following his trials. She was in the courtroom that day. I remembered watching the courtroom tape and seeing Marge suddenly stand up to face Perez, wearing the same gray pantsuit. She brought out a gun and fired 3 bullets into Perez's chest. The 2 bailiffs responded with a hail of gunfire. Once the sound of gunfire stopped, there was silence. Slowly, I let the dirt fall onto the coffin of the love of my life. I realized that I had my payback and that I would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life.